Top Med Talk.
Hello and welcome to Top Med Talk. We are here at the annual meeting of the American Association of Nurse Anesthesiology. I'm Desiree Chappell, your host, who also happens to be a CRNA, so proudly representing here at our meeting. And I'm joined by my former co-host, founding editor of Top Med Talk, Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Desiree, thank you for letting me back in the chair.
Well, it's always fun for you to come back and say hi.
No, I'm enjoying it.
You were so sweet. You've come down. So we're in San Diego for the meeting.
Yes.
It's been a phenomenal meeting. Oh my gosh. Record numbers, lots of great presentations. The exhibit hall is abuzz. And so it's been great. But you came down from Irvine.
Yeah, wearing two hats. I've declared it all before. I joined Edwards Life Sciences as their Senior Vice President for Medical Affairs just over a year ago, a year and a few days. I'm still an Emeritus Professor of Anesthesia and Critical Care at University College London. So I'm wearing both hats here, getting some of my CME, but also joining my colleagues here to talk about Edwards products.
Yes. See, my biggest question for you about the big change that you've made by joining Edwards is, how's the weather in sunny Southern California? Is it like this?
It's boring.
Yeah, absolutely. Compared to London. All right. So you come down, you're hanging out with your friends. In which I'm one of your friends.
Well, keep reminding me of that.
You came down to hear a couple presentations that I gave with my colleague and my dear friend, Amy Yerdon, who has joining us now here on Top Med Talk. Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been an amazing time so far. Yeah, always fun to join you.
Yeah, so we did a podcast here, the first one you've ever done. The only one was last year at the AANA meeting where we presented there as well, didn't we?
Right. Killing them softly. I love that title.
And maybe because of that, I must say you are two of the stars of this show.
I don't know about that.
And, well, I mean, if you're going to have a session, which you can touch on in a moment, and there's standing room only and a room out the door, then I think that speaks for itself. And usually you say standing room only, and that's because people haven't sat down in every single chair. Usually you don't have to move your jacket, your bag off the chair next to you. Every single chair in the room was full, and people were standing up yesterday. So congratulations.
The floor.
I know, yeah. And they came back. They came back and today.
Yeah, in bigger numbers. We just had you had a bigger room.
Yeah, well, it was a little bit bigger room. But yes, thank you, Monty. We did. I mean, I think that we're finally starting to gain some traction on the story that, well, you and many of our colleagues have been shouting from the rooftops for a while, but I think it's just making it down into the end users, the people who are delivering the anesthesia every day. I think CRNAs are definitely in that space. And I think we're really starting to embrace this idea that it's not just about intraoperative hypotension, that the story is much larger than that. I think that's actually starting to hit home. I see we were doing a lot of polling and things like that, and I think the tides are shifting a little bit. I hope.
It feels like it.
Yeah.
I think you set it up really well yesterday, starting off with the fact that a challenge we've had for decades is that most people don't get to see the patient's recovery profile.
Yeah.
I did, because I spent a lot of my life not because I was a great anesthesiologist who followed people up on the floor. It's because I worked mainly in surgical intensive care.
Yeah.
So, and you would have been critical care nurses as well. So would have seen the patients in the days that follow. But as you pointed out yesterday, Desiree, the vast majority of people don't see their patients anymore. Yeah. So that's not their fault, if you see. There's just no time allowed for that.
Yeah. Last year we talked a lot about this more, and we're able to interact with everybody and get more answers. I think a lot of it is production pressure. It's that even if you're working in academia, I mean, you're expected to turn over your cases very quickly. Staffing is probably the number one issue. There's not enough people to do the cases, let alone go and see your patients. And also, patients are going home. Yeah. I mean, since the days of COVID, a large portion and percentage of patients are actually outpatient or at least 23-hour observations. So they're gone really by the time that we really start kicking off, like the day after surgery. I will say it's really meaningful and impactful to me because most of my career, we always saw, we as the collective anesthesia group, someone would go up and look at every single inpatient every single day. So we really knew what our patients looked like. And so over the years, when we started utilizing different approaches, enhanced recovery, things like that, we saw an immediate difference. I don't think we see that today. I think the only people probably that raised their hand were SRNA, so student nurse anesthetists who actually see their patients. So
they're required to do so many post-op evaluations. So
but only a number of those.
Right.
They don't have to see everybody, which we had to see every single one of our own patients every day.
And then when you see your patients afterwards, there are the overt problems that you believe are something to do with you.
Yeah.
So that's pain, shivering, cold, nausea and vomiting. The list is starting to get a bit thinner now. Maybe the delirium had something to do with me, but I'm not even looking for necessarily or seeing the acute kidney injury or the myocardial injury. Is anyone looking for that?
Not in my facility.
No. It was when we, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, when we started really diving into this and looking at things like AKI and covert kind of negative outcomes. It wasn't until I started talking to our surgical colleagues say, do you guys even pull like a BMP? I always thought that was standard. We'd look at labs post-op, but I think there's been they don't, because of resources and not doing as many labs and things like that, they'll pull like an H&H, but they won't, hemoglobin hematocrit, but they won't pull their electrolytes in the other labs. So we're not really getting that information a whole lot anymore.
So yesterday you dealt with the awareness of the problem and the link with intraoperative hypotension. Desiree, you've started to use the language now, intraoperative hemodynamic instability, much more. Today, the session was very much about what to do about it. And I think you were very much pivoting off an article that I was lucky enough to read recently in the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation newsletter. Mm-hmm. And Amy, I've been on stage with you recently discussing that. Tell us a little bit more about that. This is a proper fireside chat.
This is what I imagined.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about that publication.
Yeah, so what I have heard from my colleagues is, I've been beating the drum not nearly as long as Desiree, maybe only about, 3 to 4 years, something.
Or Monty's actually started that.
The drums.
That march.
Beat it to death. But what I hear from my colleagues is they don't believe that there's a problem. And that part of that is they don't have time to read the literature. The literature the publications are exploding, and they have been. I feel like it's hard even for us to keep up with it. We're interested. We're looking for it. It's still hard to read everything that's coming out. So people who are working in the OR every day and working overtime because they're trying to cover these staffing shortages, they don't have the time to keep up with it. So they don't know that there's a problem because they're not reading. And then that's further complicated by we don't get a lot of data reported back to us on our patients, if any, right? So we don't know that our patients are having issues. So when I talk about this problem, they say, not my patients.
Yeah.
Patients never have AKI or myocardial injury. I don't have any issue. Well, just because you don't hear about it doesn't mean...
Which say no news is good news. No news doesn't mean it's good news.
Right. Do you have your head in the sand? So the whole thought was, let's do it. Let's sound the alarm. Let's raise awareness, do a public service announcement type article in the APSF, because out of what time and publications they are going to read is usually for CRNAs. The people I talk to, it's often either the AANA journal or the APSF newsletter. And the APSF being all about patient safety, it fit really well with that.
Yeah.
So we wanted to educate, raise awareness on IOH and hemodynamic instability and how we haven't been, as a nation, we've not been treating it appropriately and the iatrogenic harm that's being that's associated with that. And then we talk a little bit about continuous blood pressure monitoring and then goal-directed therapy and how you do that.
Yeah. There's a problem. We need to treat it. This is how to do it.
Right.
Kind of thing.
And Desiree, you've, with your spine surgeon colleagues, we've done some interviews.
We have talked about that, yeah.
We've had 2 recent publications come out. Let's deal with the first one, which was the spine surgeon's investigation of intraoperative hypotension and its association with outcomes in those spine cases.
Yeah.
Summary of that?
Yeah, so I worked with Leatherman Spine Institute, are my colleagues there at my home facility. When I first went to the group and the president and said, hey, I really want to kind of take a look at our spine patients and to see if there is an issue with intraoperative hypotension, is it associated with AKI? And he's like, I'm not really interested in AKI. I don't think that's a problem. He's like, but I am interested in surgical site infection. I was like, okay. He's like, I'd be willing to look at that. He said, let me do some...
I'm going to pause for a second because surgical site infection goes from a little bit of red all the way through to...
An IND incision and drainage. And so that requires surgery, which is a big deal.
So this is an infection so bad that you have to get the knife back out.
Yeah, and that's what he wanted to look at because obviously those are very resource intense, costs a lot of money, and honestly, it's terrible for the patient.
Miserable for the patient.
Yeah. So, especially if you're talking about multi-level spine and they have to be on their back, they can't move, they are in a tremendous amount of pain. It's really bad.
Now you showed, it's probably a bad choice of words, you showed the initial quick and dirty results that got them interested yesterday.
Pun intended. Yeah, we did. So what he wanted to do was look at the association with SSI and IOH and compare that to diabetes. So we know diabetes impacts surgical site infection and wounds. It's well documented. He said, I'm going to look at this. If I see, any kind of signal, then we can take a look at it. And he's like, I was very skeptical. And so when he broke it down, he actually found there was more of a signal for intraoperative hypotension than there was with diabetes impacting surgical site infection.
So now they're convinced at that stage.
He was convinced that there was something there. He wasn't quite sure what it was.
So then they looked harder, and the harder look is the paper that's just come out.
It is. It's spine.
Spine.
Yes. Not quite for sure when it's going to come out in hard copy, but
you can find it online.
You can.
You can get the PDF and
yeah. And so, yes, we looked at about 540 patients, looked at when the IOH occurred, because that was something I was very interested in. And Dr. Glassman, who was the president of Leatherman Spine, he wasn't convinced that it was actually at a certain time where it made a difference. And he actually thought it was like later in the case, where if they had more IOH later in the case, that would more impactful. And what we found was, looking at those 540 patients for major complex spine, so these are patients that had almost 10 levels of surgery, we found a significant association with IOH in the first hour, so not later on in the case, specifically greater than 15 minutes in the first hour. That was associated with surgical site requiring IND and a host of other things too.
So Amy, your students had a name for the first hour that I think you gave them, which Desiree hadn't heard before.
I had no idea.
What do we call it?
That period of time, we call it the Valley of the Prep.
Valley of the
And
Prep.
it's from the, though I walked through the Valley of of Prep.
Which, you could think of as pretty close to death these days.
Just those who are not familiar with it, there's what feels to team anesthesia like a very long period of time, which is a necessary, important period of time.
Depends on where you work at, Monty.
Well, for spines in particular, there's position.
There is a ton of work to be done before the knife to skin.
So and that can be an hour.
Or more. Yeah, absolutely.
So if I heard it correctly, and I've read the paper correctly, the strong signal of association was in that first.
It was.
So now the surgeons are all standing around in a circle pointing at.
Before we would always complain about it. They always say it's, anesthesia's fault. Well, as I've quoted Taylor Swift a couple times this week, it's me, I'm the problem. It actually is. I mean, the signal is there that the hypotension that we cause, because of what we have to do to anesthetize the patient, when we let their blood pressure go below a mean of 65, we can be causing some.
Is that fair though? I can see the association is clear, but Amy, I was brought up to believe that hypotension was relatively harmless.
That's
we always thought.
Meditation.
Right. When you literally see the surgeon, they walk in and their hands, they're just waiting on so it's like they're going to cut in like any minute. So if I treat right now, then I'm going to have hypertension when they stimulate the patient. So I remember being so stressed out by that as a student. I don't know what to do. Do I treat it right now or do I wait? And the preceptor would always say, that's the Valley of the Prep. That's why it's awful.
Cut in and get a little spurter. When you've just pushed the pressure right up. They
not excited about that.
They used to really scowl at you, didn't they?
Yeah.
It's completely irrelevant, but it's not a good look.
Right.
So and the harm signal, Desiree, the list was long. And you was going to say long and glorious, long and depressing, really. So can you list them off roughly again?
It is, yeah.
Everything.
It was. So, SSI, we also saw significant impact on GI complications. So post-op nausea and vomiting, ileus requiring NG tube after surgery, which we all know is absolutely miserable. We also saw a signal for AKI as well. We were measuring that. It wasn't significant, but we definitely saw a trend in that way. We saw pulmonary complications increased. And so it was a lot more than we thought. And what I was most surprised about, even though I think this is in the literature more and more, was post-op cognitive dysfunction. And that just hits home with me because I know so many patients that I've rounded on in the past. That's one of those overt things. You do see that, but you see patients and it's terrible. It's scary. It's scary for the patient. It's scary for their family. Quite frankly, it's scary for the care providers. It's difficult to take care of them. So when we saw a signal for that, which was fairly strong, we thought this was definitely something. We got their attention, as you said.
A little bit of the history behind this is that we'd been together at a presentation. Your surgical colleagues, wonderful surgical colleagues, had come along and they'd stayed right through to the end of the presentation because within the presentation were the now quite famous microcirculation slide.
Yeah.
Where we and it's a longer story, but we'd put a camera into the gut of an animal model and demonstrated that if you have a little bit of hypovolemia and you give a vasopressor, the normal bedside numbers look great, but the gut is dying.
Yeah.
And the fact that they sort of both went pale and wide-mouthed and stayed to the end and said, run that by me again.
Yeah.
Is that about right? They said,
Dr. Gum.
Why that might be going on in my patients.
Yeah, Dr. Jeff Gum, who we worked with and partnered with on some other initiatives, and he was starting to pull all this data. He's the first one that I talked to. I was like, come and listen to this presentation. And he saw those slides. He still talks about it. And he tells everybody he knows, and he shows them in presentations that he gives across the spine world. He stuck around. He's like, please tell me more about this. And then, we were all having a conversation about the different bacteria that we see in wound infections and SSI and the surgical site infections that we see, and that it's not skin flora.
So are you surprised at the results now, Amy? Now you've seen those images. Now you've read deeper into this field over the last number of years and become an expert. Does it all make sense to you now?
It all makes sense to me now. The first time I saw those gut images, that was like when my eyes were finally open, and it was like, no idea. And so every time I see it in the OR, I'm working with the student, they allow the pressure to drift down. I'm like, what's happening to their gut right now? Do you know what is happening? To hear your results, it makes total sense. But I think it's just more of what people need that aren't, really into this space, or really haven't read a lot. They need to see that. And I think that's such a good study. It shows the whole picture. It's not just AKI, men's mortality.
I'm waiting for those gut images to be published, Monty.
They're out there, they're out there in a form. You can discover them in many different places.
I know.
So to put it all together, decades of research, the gut becomes ischemic. It starts to leak.
Mm-hmm.
As it starts to leak, it's also pouring out serotonin locally, which is ending up in the vomiting center, which gives you postoperative nausea and vomiting. The leaking gut contents, your sewage system into your bloodstream, it gets to your liver, causes an inflammatory action. Then it gets to your lungs, which causes an acute lung injury.
Yep.
Right-sided pressures go up. Then your gut postoperatively dilates, splints your diaphragm, you can't breathe properly. Meanwhile, the blood that's been going around at the time you're closing the wound has got tummy bugs in it.
Yeah.
So the other thing we challenged them with is, I bet when you look at the bugs in your SSI drainage,
they did too.
They found some.
Yeah, it wasn't enough to actually look at and be conclusive, but they started to see
some E. coli in there, some gut-derived, possibly gut-derived organisms.
Yes,
could be skin-derived.
Yeah,
but the fact that about half are, gut-derived organisms.
Yeah.
So
when we do our larger study, all that data will be there.
Okay, so we'll come back to the results of the interventional pilots in a second. So revelations or reassurances from today, Amy. So the packed room again, bigger room, with people where you're helping them understand what to do about this. You asked the audience a whole bunch of questions. Did you have any surprises, any reassuring surprises, any disappointing surprises?
A lot more attendees today raised their hand that they are using goal-directed therapy monitors.
No one raised their hand yesterday. Maybe 5 people,
right,
max.
But did you notice who raised their hands? It was the same group of people when you didn't have any students in the room.
Yes.
And I think that it's very...
It was Amy's students.
There were some of them. We brought 14, but they are there. Kind of matches up with what I see in the operating room a lot, that our providers, our anesthesia professionals that did not have this technology in the ICU are a little bit... I'm not sure about it. I'm skeptical. It's unfamiliar. I don't know what to do with the information. Whereas the newer, younger generation had these monitors in the ICU, so it makes sense to them. So they're very receptive in the OR to, how can I use this tool that I'm already familiar with to improve my patient care right now?
Yeah.
And so that was reassuring that, the future is bright. I think we can get GDT off the ground and really promote it. I stand by this stance. I think a good plan is infiltration.
You do that for your students.
Yeah. That I train them up in the OR, and then I send them out to you go get the monitor into that OR, and you teach that CRNA and that anesthesiologist how to do it, because they're more likely to do it if they see someone else do it who's kind of taking the responsibility for it. So
more goal directors. I was surprised there were more colloid confessors. People who are admitting to colloid.
Which was a colloid? So Amy had everybody at the end raise their hands, and if you use colloid, you put your hands like I
think it was cristamoid for a tent and colloid for arms over. So she then took a still photograph, and it makes it look as though the whole audience was clapping. which you admitted to them, which was very clever.
Yeah,
I got that idea from Ken Taylor.
Oh my God.
Stand up and you got one.
But so I wasn't even thinking that. I was like, so who are all the colloid users?
Yeah.
No, was that about 50-50? I feel like
It was a
It
good
was
mix.
about 50-50.
Yeah. Which I was surprised because I think I've asked that question the last couple of years because we're here and we've been talking about IOH for a couple of years. And I think that more people are using colloids again. I think we went through kind of a dip and people stopped using colloids. They were very restricted in hospitals for cost and things like that. But 50-50, I was really surprised with that many people in the room.
I'm not going to get back into the colloid crystalloid debate, but I think a compounding factor of the fluid restriction zero balance story is people went to being zero balance at the same time as they went to crystalloid, not colloid. So and I think you saw this in the UK quite a lot, even if you think, well, look, there's not a 3-to-1 ratio of colloid to crystalloid, there's at least a 1.7 to 2.2 ratio. If you now reduce your volumes and you switch from colloid to crystalloid, you've greatly reduced your effective.
Yeah,
Theory uncontaminated.
by data.
Uncontaminated by data. But let's get off that one and go to the norepinephrine infusion.
Yeah.
A lot of hands up for that. A lot of hands up for that.
Yeah. I
thought so, compared to before.
Yesterday, I guess, whenever we asked that question, I felt like
there were more. Well, there was today because I was like non-cardiac and they still kept their hands up. So there really was more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
I am seeing some people use it like they just go straight to a norepi drip. Like in some of our spine at my hospital, there are some people doing that, but it's not a goal-directed therapy approach. They're just throwing it on because they've read that norepi is better than phenylephrine.
Right. And I will say, in the defense of throwing up a vasopressor, whether it's neo or not, Dr. Glassman, one of the things we talked about is literature to support driving up blood pressure for spinal cord perfusion and when they're running motors and things like that, making sure that you're perfusing. And so he's like, I would always tell people you need to give a little bit of neo to drive that pressure up.
So with you, Amy, slightly worried by the fact that we've gone from saying don't fluid restrict, take a fill flow pressure approach, don't use just pure alpha, don't just throw phenylephrine at things. It's okay to use a norepinephrine infusion, and people have gone straight to number 5 or 6 and said, okay, I'm going to use a norepinephrine infusion.
Right.
That's a bit worrying.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it is. I was going to go down another rabbit hole, but yes.
The overall message from the session today was goal-directed therapy is a fill flow pressure approach, address the underlying cause, and you shared with us, Desiree, an HPI, an Edwards Technology, artificial intelligence guided pilot study.
Yep.
Where you made a couple of little changes about how you used HPI and how you did goal-directed therapy, and then you can share with us the results that are now in press.
They are. They just said this last week. Yes, again in spine. Very excited about that. But what we found is using a goal-directed approach with an HPI of 50 and a very specific protocol that our team used and was very compliant
Should remind people, HPI is a scale from 0 to 100.
Yes.
The alarm goes off at 85. But over the last 5 or 6 years of use, by the time you get to 85, it's really quite obvious you're about to crash.
You're going to hit the wall.
Yeah, so you as an experienced practitioner and other people who taught around the world have brought it right back down to 50.
Yeah.
Which, interesting, in the lab is where you get microcirculatory disturbance of 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
and so that was our target. So, or not our target, but that was our trigger for treatment. So we would wait, or, we would go along. If a HPI started to go above 50, we'd kind of take a look at it. And then we had a protocolized approach to that. We had already bolused fluid. So we had already optimized the patient's fluid status. And then we looked at cardiac index. We'd done the fill. We waited for the HPI to start going above 50. And then we looked at cardiac index. And then if the cardiac index was below our target, then we would give an inotrope. And if it was normal, then we would look at the SVR. And if it was high, then we would give vasopressor.
So fill flow pressure. So I think your colloid users, aren't you, for your boluses?
We are, yes. And our colloid use did go up in the study.
And for your contractility, what were you giving?
Ephedrine or calcium. Yeah, okay. We haven't broken it. We weren't able to break it down.
Afterload?
Neosynephrine. Yeah.
So stuff that's readily available.
It's every day of the week.
Now, your published paper, I've seen the results, I've seen them presented here, before and after study.
Yep.
The results done by the surgeons again. So you did the interventions, but they did the outcomes.
All the data for the outcomes, yes.
how many patients beforehand?
70 were the control.
And afterwards?
Almost 50.
Almost
47,
50.
yeah.
And?
Well, when using a goal-directed approach with HPI, we were able to reduce our hypotension by 43%. We had an increase in colloids. Our vasopressor use was reduced by 72%.
Okay, so pause there again. Intraoperative hypotension went down.
Went down.
Use of vasopressors went down. Because colloid, not because, associated with colloid going
Increase.
up. So you've obvious evidence of fill flow. Fill and pressure, you've got evidence of, but I guess there's flow in between.
Yeah.
And what happened to the outcomes?
Well, when we looked at the same outcomes that we looked at for the larger patient population in the previous study, we were able to significantly reduce SSI requiring IND, so it's the surgical site infections that impacted them.
Clinically and statistically significant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. We saw a signal in AKI. We saw an improvement in urine output. And then we reduced our post-op nausea and vomiting to 0 from 14%. And then we also saw a significant reduction in post-op cognitive dysfunction. It's amazing.
Boom.
Drop the mic.
Are you surprised? Is that what you see when you do this clinically, or people around you do it clinically?
Well, again, we're not getting outcomes data. So
I can say from a surgical intensive care unit perspective, when people come back and people have put all those effort in, you really are surprised if the patient has any problems.
Yeah.
Whereas when they come back a little bit cold and shut down and on a vasopressor infusion they shouldn't really need, you're not surprised if you get all those problems.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
when I first started talking about HPI with my colleagues and doing some lectures a year and a half ago, that there was not a lot of studies out yet about patient outcomes with HPI. So now that you have this, it's amazing, and it's going into my lectures to show that, yes, well, because that was always the question. Okay, so you can avoid hypotension, but does that actually make a difference for the patients?
Yeah.
And yes, it does.
It does.
and you're starting a bigger study and you're starting the hemodynamic registry.
We are, yeah. We're Dr. Glassman and Dr. Gum, the whole team with Leatherman's Mind, they're all in. We're going to be doing some more work around delirium. We're going to be doing larger studies around arterial lines versus using the Acumen cuff, so the finger cuff, so putting an arterial line on versus putting an arterial line in, and are we missing blood pressure there? And looking at the continuum of care, so preoperatively all the way through 24 hours, and what the impact of all kinds of hypotension, what that has on the patient. And then we're starting a hemodynamic registry where we collect the hemodynamic information and be able to use that for QI projects, because as Amy said, and as I continue to say, team anesthesia, there's not a whole lot of data out there for us. Some people can get it more readily than others, but I want to be able to give instant feedback to our providers to let them know where they are. And so hopefully they can't any longer say that there's no problem, I don't have hypotension. We can actually say, well, your rate of hypotension last week was X. So we'll see. I'm hoping to get there.
Well, thank you for letting me interview both of you.
Yeah.
At your request as a guest editor for this. Amy, closing comments or anything else you want to share with the folks out there?
I'm just excited that we seem to be getting some traction and some interest in this, and I hope that continues in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I talked to many people here over the weekend that are doing their own projects, DNP projects. A couple of folks are just taking this upon themselves in their own community facilities to start looking at. So I'm really excited about that. I hope we can get more data in the hands of our providers, because what I've learned through this entire process and when we got the reviews from when we submitted articles is that there are a lot of people who still believe, who are reviewing these articles, that still believe that intraoperative hypotension is not a problem. To me, when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, we still have a lot of work. But I'm hopeful that because we're doing more of this and getting out there more and sending this message out through things like the APSF. So thank you to the APSF. But if we can do this, we can get the message out there and people can realize that,
It's also very clear, I think, emphasized in both days that the unintended consequence of the emphasis of hypotension is setting an alarm and treating just blood pressure.
Yeah.
Because that's causing harm.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that repeatedly.
Absolutely.
Through the use of vasopressors, less fluid, things getting worse, not better. So you're treating the underlying cause.
Yeah. And I think, to me, that Choi paper, so the MPOG, and I think we've talked about it on Top Med Talk, and if you're just listening, check that paper out, Michigan Perioperative Outcomes Group. for me, I'm so glad that they did that, because what they found is over about 4 or 5 years, they really they gave quality data and quality metrics back to their teams. And so people saw, oh, my rate of IOH is high. I need to make sure I don't have IOH. And so their rate of IOH actually went down. Their rate of vasopressors went up. Their rate of fluid administration went down, but their rate of AKI went up. And so it was like you said, the unintended consequences is doing what you think is the right thing. But I think we have missed the mark in the past. And so I'm excited about the hemodynamic message and treating the underlying cause.
Set an alarm and treat and give a vasopressor. You completely missed the point.
Totally.
Just treating a number.
Totally.
Just forget the alarm. Go back to where you were.
Yeah.
Desiree, bring us home.
Monty, thank you so much for coming down to hang with Amy and I and supporting us in this journey, and just in general, but definitely this weekend. And I look forward to some of the cool stuff we're working on. And thank you for listening to Top Med Talk. You can always find us on your favorite social media platform, your favorite podcatcher. We're there. Check out Top Med Talk for more great content like you have heard over this past weekend here at the AANA, and all the amazing conferences that we go to and talk to great speakers, presenters, key opinion leaders, subject matter experts over the year.
Where are you going to be live next?
Where are we going next?
Ireland.
So you're home.
ASA after that?
Yes. So we're going to Dingle. We're going to the American Society of Anesthesiology. And then we are going to Australia.
Oh, there we go.
TMT Down Under. Yeah. Yes. Stay tuned for more information about that. If you do want to go to Ireland, you have a month to sign up. There's still a couple places left. If you want to take a last minute trip, I think flights are still okay. And it's an amazing conference. More from that. All right, guys. Have a great day. Ching.
Top Med Talk.
Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe. Check us out on YouTube and, of course, on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook and X. Also, it's important to remember that Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EPPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that, and the way to do that is eppom.org. Check out our website and find out about some of the incredible conferences we're going to be arranging across the year. eppom.org.